Hello and welcome to Brain Trust Live. Hey y'all, I'm Brent.
I'm Lila, and you can find us on the web at www.braintrustlive.com.
Well, it's been a minute.
Sure has.
Ooh,
We
boy.
have talked a lot about what we want to do with this podcast, given that truly nobody wants to read the news right now.
No, I know.
So you don't want us to come through here every week telling you bad news.
No. Well, and it's interesting, too, because I feel like multiple people have asked if we're recording something, and I think the consensus is that, like, I keep saying, like, yeah, we intend to. Like, people are just, I think, feeling like we just don't want to do it and don't know what to do. And, like,
Right.
that's not really been the... It's been weird. I feel like the last time that we recorded was in
late November.
It was, like, in late November. Like, after Thanksgiving, I had COVID for like 3 weeks.
Right.
You were gone for the holidays in New York. I have been gone literally the entire month of March in
Right.
various different places. I mean, it's in part because we've been sort of like, oh, what do we do? But it's also like quite literally been like...
We've not been in the same
We've
place.
barely been in the same
And
room
it has-
with each other in the last 6 months, which is weird. But
It has felt important that we be in the same room for at least these early podcasts in this new era of America. Because I think we talked a little bit about this at the end of November. But I think we want this podcast to be like a productive exercise, not just for you, a listener who may or may not exist, but for us, the people that make the podcast. Because in the past, I think this podcast, the reason we have kept it going so long is because we have found it productive.
Yeah.
We really like doing a deep dive into the news every week.
sure.
We like thinking and analyzing what's going on in Washington.
We also really love to have a record of really like a decade of being right.
Yes. The most important thing that you can ever give us is the knowledge that we have been right again and again. Being right is our favorite thing.
And we have, when did we start recording this again?
2012, March of 2012.
Right, 2012. I mean, I remember before we even recording, or right as we were recording, talking about like how the time for populism was now.
Right.
Remember that?
And
Remember
it's,
that?
listen,
We wrote
sadly,
an op-ed.
we were
wrote an
really
op-
right about that.
Right, we wrote an op-ed in 2013, like right not long after we started doing this podcast about like how Hillary Clinton wasn't the right candidate for the time, and it was before Bernie Sanders had even announced.
No.
So like, you know, I feel like we have a deep history of knowledge of rightness on
That's right. On record.
On record, and also in terms of like rightness in regards to what the current state of the world calls for.
That's right. When I was going to say, because you may be wondering why it's so important that you know how right we are. And part of it is just because you're listening to a podcast from two only children. But the other part of it is that we are not going to do a deep dive into the news this week.
No.
We are not really going to be talking much, even in the future, about the sort of like daily minutia of politics in America right now. We are going to be talking about sort of what actions and thoughts and, you know, ideas we, the general public, and we, the sort of like left wing of America, can take moving forward toward to kind of change our political reality in ways that benefit us.
Yeah.
And we're not going to be talking about that in terms of like who should vote for who in blah, blah, blah. Like, obviously, there's not elections coming up anyway, but also we've historically been mostly an elections podcast. And right now, I think we're in a different moment. It calls for a different approach to how to engage with politics.
Right. And the other reason why I think it's important to note that we're right about everything all the time. I'm going back to that. I'm going to keep harping on that.
You know what? Do it.
No, but honestly, I think that like the people that we're hearing from right now and the people that were hearing from leading up to the election and for the last decade or 20 years or 40 years are people who have been wrong about everything.
Yeah. We've been in an era of people being absolutely wrong.
Right. There are a lot of blowhards with podcasts right now who haven't said anything right since you've been listening to them.
That's right.
So that's another reason why I just want to put that out there right now because it feels important.
Yeah. I mean, I did fall into the hopeful election outcome wrongness.
We all did.
It's
I
a
still
classic
blame
story.
Ann Seltzer.
Yeah, I blame Ann Seltzer. I blame somebody because I don't want to blame myself, but I also blame myself. But here's what we're going to be doing moving forward. And this episode is really going to be about this, but this is going to be
today. Who knows what we'll do next week.
Right. But this is going to be kind of like, I think, the thrust of at least how we intend to approach the political news and, reality moving forward.
Yeah.
Which is, we are going to be talking about what it takes to be an effective opposition and what we could be doing right now to not sort of watch our nation sink into an unfathomable and dangerous place. We're not going to be talking about what's going wrong. A lot's going wrong. Sorry about it. I can't be. I had said to Brent and to my parents that I was not going to follow the first 100 days of this administration because I was just like,
obviously.
Right. It hasn't happened yet. I've already violated that rule. But I don't want to fall into what we know to be a sort of endless cycle of drama that distracts us and distresses us. And it's not that we're not in that cycle right now and we're not feeling the effects of it. But it is that we don't want this podcast to become a place that does that for you, our listener.
Yeah.
We want this podcast to be a place where you take forward some thoughts about what we could do instead.
Yes.
And how to use this time differently. And so I think the main thing that I came to talk about is what the messaging rules for this new moment should be and how we could sort of change our approach, not just how Democratic lawmakers could change their approach, because we've been telling you for years about how that can be, how they could be changing their approach, but how the sort of opposition flank of the party. And that includes activists, and that includes you, a listener, and that includes everyone who considers themselves anything short of like a sort of like fully conservative voter.
Yeah.
How you could be thinking about messaging, how to be effective opposition, how to be not just effective opposition, but effective legislators and lawmakers, how to have an effective experience with government, and how to think differently about this moment than just everything's falling apart and I feel sad.
Sure. Because I'm probably going to throw a little of that in here every now and again.
We expected it, and it's fine. And it's not that everything is falling apart and I do feel sad.
Everyone's met me.
But everyone's met Brent. I feel like, I said to Brent, I was like, people keep calling me to make them feel better about what's going on right now. And I can't really do that because everything that's going on is terrible. And I feel very drained by this obligation. Right. I want to be able to direct them to this episode of the podcast so that they can be like, oh, okay, here's what my marching orders are. Yeah. Here's what to do next. And I don't mean that like make 5 calls a day style.
Yeah.
But just about like, here's what this moment requires, and it is a real thing that we could really do. It's not just that we have to sit around and like count our losses and hope nothing bad happens.
Right. It may shock our listeners to know that no one has called and asked me to do that. Not a one.
All the people who would call both of us and listen to this podcast are calling me.
I know.
They don't want what you have to say.
No.
Apparently.
Well,
but they're going to get it.
You know what?
We're on the podcast right now.
I feel like
it's only one side of the microphone.
I've spent since 2012 curating this very moment in time for myself where everybody just leaves me alone.
I also don't want to mistake this approach that I'm advocating for not being critical of the current powers that be.
Hello?
I'm being very careful not to use partisan language when I say that, but I mean very much that I don't approve of the way Democrats in particular are handling this moment. And that those are the people that we voted for. So those are the people that we should expect action from.
Sure.
They are, I can't do anything about people that I didn't vote for in a political movement that I'm not a part of.
That I think is one of the things that has that I have been struggling with, and you and I haven't even really talked about this. Yeah. So this is probably some therapy that you're going to have to do with me.
Classic.
Right now. So,
it's a classic story.
After you've just...
I'm experienced. I have a lot of experience.
Yeah. But I do, based on what you just said, one of the things that I think that I'm struggling with is that, like, obviously, I feel like the Democrats are doing quite literally everything wrong.
Literal losers.
And we'll get into that. But to your point about, like, these are the people that we voted for and these are the people that we expect more of, I don't expect more of them, and I didn't really actually vote for them either.
No.
So and I'm not trying to like just be specific about that, but like I am sort of like at this point right now where I'm just sort of like, well, like, yes, I would like them to be doing better, but like,
yeah, why would you expect losers like this to be doing better?
Right. And also just sort of like, I don't even know if them doing better is like, I mean, I want them to be doing better in the sense that like we should be doing what we can to be stopping Trump, I guess.
Yes.
Right? And his insane policies and things like that. But like, is helping them figure out like how to save themselves really my project?
No. And it's not my project either. When I say that I want sort of like Democrats an opposition party to be governing more effectively.
Sure.
I'm not talking
You don't
about
even-
these
right,
people,
I was
and
gonna-
I'm not talking about this
Sure,
Democratic
fair.
Party. I'm talking about the
It's-
idea that an opposition party
Yeah.
can exist effectively,
Right.
and that we have a role to play in advocating for that to happen.
Yes.
I am also planning, should we get to vote again ever in our lives,
Well, sure.
I am planning, I'm never going to vote for a single incumbent ever again
Yeah.
that served in this administration.
Yeah.
I mean that for Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah.
There is almost nobody currently serving in Congress or at any level of government that is not sort of like local that
Yeah.
I would ever vote for again. And so when I'm talking about how Democrats can be effective, I'm talking about primarying these fuckers. When I talk about how an opposition party can be effective, I'm talking about how do we conceive of what an opposition can look like that is actually effective, because
Right.
these fools aren't it.
These fools
And
aren't
you
it.
know what? It feels insurmountable to sort of think that way, and that's in part, I think, why everyone feels stuck in this dynamic where it's like, oh, you must be asking Chuck Schumer to do something he would never do. I'm not. I'm asking for Chuck Schumer to resign his office and for somebody more effective to take his place. Yes. And what I'm saying is, you as a voter, you as a constituent, can ask for anything right now. There are currently no rules. The law at the federal level doesn't exist anymore. If we, and I mean we, if everyone as a community decides that what we really want is snap elections, we could decide that that's what we're going to advocate for. We don't have to advocate for something that has happened before or expect people that have never acted right in their lives to act right. We don't have to decide that these Democrats have to be the ones to save us while they're taking money from billionaires. We can decide that we're not voting for anyone who takes money from billionaires anymore, and we can make that a reality. It's not when we're thinking. I'm thinking. My main point is that we should be thinking really big about our goals instead of kind of getting stuck in the dynamic we're in now, where nobody's effective.
Yep.
So when I'm talking about opposition and I'm talking even about Democrats, I'm not talking about these people.
Yeah.
I'm talking about what you can do to force the hand of these people to change something, and maybe that is part of the step, that we need to take. I'm talking about how you can get rid of these people. I'm talking about how these people could be doing their jobs effectively, but not just these people, how anyone in their position could be doing their jobs effectively. And that means that if you are a person who could be in their position because you're a human being who needs a job and wants to run for Congress, then this is what you could be doing in their position. It doesn't have to be that some random backbencher who's never raised their head in their lives and never is going to because they're corporately funded is the only hope to do these things.
Right.
So what we're going to do is go through what we've discussed and what we've written out as kind of the main messaging rules of this moment, the main messaging kind of strategies of this moment that would be more effective than what are happening now. And this is geared towards lawmakers, it's geared towards activists, but it's also geared towards how regular people, what they advocate for, how they engage with government, how they engage with each other around politics, and just in general, how we could be thinking more effectively about how to meet this moment. And Brent is going to chime in when he needs to remind you of how terrible everything is going. But also, at no point will it not be welcome on this podcast to talk shit about Democrats.
Oh,
because
right.
they're fucking failing us on the large scale. And like I said before, I really don't have an interest in litigating how people I didn't vote for and don't align with the values of act and don't act.
You're right.
I can't do anything about them. I'm not part of a community that voted for, right-wing Republicans in this moment, and I'm probably never going to be part of a community that did that, and I don't know how to understand what they were hearing and what made them kind of think the way that they did. I have thoughts about how we could be helping them hear different things and think differently about politics, but I don't want to litigate why they did what they did, and I don't care.
But I think the dichotomy that we're going to have here, we're going to be agreeing on things, but just me weighing, I think you saying the thing that we should be doing and then me saying, well, the Democrats aren't going to do that because they're awful, is actually will be good for our listeners, because then they can be reminded why all of them need to be thrown to the street.
Well, and also
and
why
the
they
Democratic
need to do
Party,
something.
potentially in its entirety, should just be taken out back.
Yeah.
Smothered.
Anytime that you hear why Democrats aren't going to do something, know that doesn't release you of the obligation to do it.
Sure.
You are not the Democratic Party. You are an individual who theoretically wants to be served in a democratic fashion. Then it's fallen on you. Sorry about it. Anyway.
Yeah. All right.
Rule number 1. You have to actually stand for something. You can't just stand against things. We've talked about this a lot on the podcast, but a lot of Democratic messaging of late has been about how terrible, MAGA Republicans are and what they, what kinds of destructive things they're going to be up to and how they're going to destroy democracy, a concept that we can't prove has any value because we don't use it for any productive end. It's like you can't just be... you can't have democracy be the only thing you stand for.
We've been saying this long before, to go back on this point.
Yes.
About being right. But honestly, though, I mean, we have been talking about that for literal years, going back to the last election, because it's just sort of like, my response to we have to save democracy is always like, for what?
Right. What is it good for then? Tell us why democracy serves us.
Right.
And why does it serve us? It serves us because it supposedly is the way that we most effectively legislate in the benefit to the benefit of the most people.
Yes.
We're not doing that right now.
Right. That's why I think it's like it's less we need to save democracy and more we need to make government work for you.
Yes. And to focus on that instead of saving democracy forces you to explain what government working is. And that's a thing that Democrats in particular have failed to say.
Right, because that requires them having the ideas.
Exactly. And that is the one area that is both required and the basic beginnings of any political movement, and also the one thing they've been failing at for this entire time.
Right.
So that's number one. You have to have proactive ideas. You can't just have reactive ideas.
Yeah.
Number two, and this is something that I hear a lot of individual voters doing, and so this is both a problem, I think, at the party level, but I think this is a problem in the conversations you are personally having with your friends right now.
All the time.
Yes.
All the time.
Here's the thing. Individual voters, people you know, might be assholes. A lot of people are. If you have an uncle that has unfathomably bad politics, I keep trying to say unfathomable and I can't pronounce it for some reason today.
You just did it twice.
I had flubbed it every time. I don't know if you when you listen back, you'll hear.
You just needed a microphone in front
I needed a microphone in front of me to be able to stop pronouncing words. But you might have an uncle with terrible politics who you are like, that guy's an idiot and I wish that he wasn't allowed to vote. Right. Fine. Individual people in your life might be monsters.
Sure.
You cannot blame groups of voters, broad groups of voters, for political outcomes. If a large group of people is voting against their interest or, is voting based on false information, that is a failure on your part, not theirs. Yeah. That is a failure on the messaging machine, not a failure on their part. Take an active role in fixing the messaging that led to that outcome. Don't just decide that you're going to write off that group of voters, because a lot of what is happening right now, we have said for years, as Brent pointed out, among our many right things, this is a populist moment in politics. It's been for the last decade. Populist messaging was going to be successful messaging in this moment in politics, whether it came from the right or left. Sadly, most of it came from the right. Whatever. What are you going to do? But part of, taking an active role in messaging to people is messaging effectively to people in a way that they can hear and understand. That's why populist messaging works. Yep. Democrats tried so hard to bury their populist leaders. They tried so hard to bury their populist messaging. Republicans embraced it whole hog. Yep. There's a reason that voters en masse voted the way that they did. That has nothing to do with the goodness of any of the ideas that were presented to them, but a lot to do with what ideas broke through and made sense and sounded sensible and sounded like they were benefiting them and not other people. Yep. And I don't mean to litigate the value of these ideas in this situation, because I know that a lot of the things that were promised by Republicans were lies. They were based on false information. Sure. They were, meant to play up dramas between different groups of people that shouldn't exist in the first place. People who should be aligned were not aligned. Yes. But you also saw that on the left, a lot of those walls broke down with effective populist messaging, and Democrats put them back up. Yes. So you cannot go around talking about how dumb Americans are and how dumb voters are and why people didn't know better than to just vote, and because a lot of people didn't vote, and why people voted against their own interests. And I've heard people say horrific things about conservative voters in the last 6 months that might be true of your uncle. He might be an asshole and he might be dumb, but you can't use that same logic to say that 80 million people are that dumb. 80 million people voted for the reasons they voted for. Your job is to convince them to take the message of how they voted and convince them that your message was better.
And by saying that they are just all stupid, you're sort of implying that there's no reason to dig in and see how to win some of those people back.
And that they're hopeless. That you're saying the situation is hopeless. The situation is not hopeless because some of those people didn't vote this way in the last election because other people have won elections before. So, they're not hopeless because sometimes you can just, if you successfully get an idea to somebody, they can decide that that's a better idea. Sometimes you can convince them that you're better for them than the other guy. You have to be willing to try that, but you have to be willing to kind of listen to the wisdom of groups of voters.
Yeah.
This many people voting for Donald Trump is a failure on the part of Democrats. It's not really, it's not a sign that Americans are just too dumb to do anything.
Right.
Americans are as dumb and smart as anyone's ever been. Everyone in the world is just people. Americans are not uniquely bad or uniquely good. We're just people. We do dumb shit all the time. We do smart stuff sometimes too. We're friendly. We're not, we have qualities, but I've just heard so many people say so many horrific things about sort of fellow Americans that are meant in the broad, to be taken to a broad swath of people and are kind of projecting what they hate about their uncle onto everyone in America. Sure. And that's not a smart way to do politics. Yeah. And it's a hopeless way to do politics. Stop being so fucking hopeless. Anyway, okay. Number 3. This is for politicians mostly, but it's for anyone who's in the public eye around politics. Act like you know you're on television. Democrats have wasted numerous opportunities to own the news cycle in the last few months because of their insistence on being fucking boring. Politics is 90% theater, especially right now. Yeah. We have a TV star as the president.
Right.
He is somebody who is really masterful at stealing a news cycle.
Sure.
And knowing that, and also knowing that a lot of what he does is meant to steal a news cycle. It's not even meant to be effective. It's meant to steal the news cycle.
The entire Republican Party has obviously taken this note because they've all gotten an immense amount of plastic surgery and injectables done in the last couple years.
Exactly.
So they took the note.
Yes. No, this moment in politics in particular.
I'm going to be on TV a lot.
Yeah. It's about being on television.
Right.
Use your high visibility opportunities to your advantage. Like that joint session response that Elise Slotkin
talked about how great Ronald Reagan was.
Put AOC in that slot. I don't care if you don't agree with her. I don't care if she's a problem for donors. She can get a headline. She would say something that would keep you in the headlines.
Yeah.
That's what that moment was for. It was not to message to your donors. It was to message to us. The fact that you chose to message to your donors instead of us is sort of the problem. But not one of these people seems to know they're on television. And also, Democrats in particular have been really ineffective at finding which Democrats are appropriate to which mediums. Because I think another thing that they're thinking really simplistically about how the media environment works right now, where they're like, who's telegenic? Because all we care about is sound bites on MSNBC. Here's a newsflash. No one's watching MSNBC anymore. No one is watching cable news. No. The newspapers are owned by billionaires. There's a bunch of random independent news that you have to find people for, right? And that random independent news comes in short form and long form. There are Democrats who I know to be, effective communicators in long form that are not given the opportunity to speak in long form because everyone's afraid they'll actually talk. There are Democrats who are wildly ineffective in short form but just think they're really important and keep, are getting sent out to deliver meaningless sound bites all over the airwaves that are making it onto places like social media but only as jokes. Figure out who should be talking to who, hit every kind of media.
Yeah.
You have a zillion Democrats in there because they're all debate kids who would love to go on Fox News and battle it out the way Pete Buttigieg does. And a lot of them would probably be pretty effective at it, but you have to kind of let them do the thing. You have to let them say something. You have to, you have to have a message that they can share with that audience. And there has just been no attempt to grab the news cycle back at any point from, this sort of Trump's very masterful, ownership of it right now.
Yep.
And to be wasting opportunities left, right, and center because you're so busy trying to placate your donors, who, by the way, are going to disappear when you're not in power anymore.
Right.
Because that's what you do. And that brings me to my next point. It's a waste of time. My next point is this. Never communicate to your own voters or your donors that you have no power.
Oh my God.
Democrats are out here being like, oh, sorry, we wish we could do something, but we're in the minority. We can't do anything. How have Republicans been governing from the minority for my entire fucking life? And Democrats get into the minority one time and they're like, oh, we just have no power. Sorry.
Well,
what? First of all, even if you have no power, you're in government. Pretend you do.
I know.
It's theater. Just look powerful. How hard is that? That's walk around pretending that what you care about matters. Don't sit around being like, you guys, it's not fair that you're calling us. We can't do anything. Figure out how to do something. The number of people in Congress right now, or the number of staffers in Congress right now, I should say, who have been like, we're taking ideas. If you have ideas, we're open to them. First of all, they're not. But second of all, you should have an idea as not you, the staffer, you, the person, your boss should know what to do in a moment like this. Sure. They're a fucking professional politician.
Yeah.
This is their whole job.
Right. I know. One thing that I love about what we're doing right now is because like this is all very detailed, but I do want to say one thing that is important for people to remember, and you and I, we've talked about this on the podcast before too. You were talking about Occupy. It is also okay. I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, you're going to have a list of things that you can know and point to and go back and review if you want to. But also, a perfectly acceptable thing to do is to just get really fucking mad and call your congressperson and be like, you're a piece of shit. I'm your constituent. Thank you. Goodbye.
That's right. Absolutely. By the way,
you are not the ideas person.
No, you don't have to tell them how to do their job.
Right.
You elected them so that you could be free of that responsibility and could go about dealing with your bullshit so that they could do the job of governing.
Right. That's why they're there.
That's why they're there. In theory. Right. They're there currently in practice because billionaires decided they should be. But in theory, their job is to have the ideas, and your job is to tell them what your priorities are so that their ideas can appropriately represent your priorities. Right. If you want to call them and just tell them they're pieces of shit, by the way, they're going to make it seem like that's rude to do. You can do that. No one can stop you. They still have to represent you, even if you told them they were a piece of shit. But like the idea that they would think it would be acceptable to sit around being sore losers and whining about how they have no agency in a moment like this is bananas, and you should not accept that from your representatives. You shouldn't accept that from anyone you elect to do anything.
Yeah.
You shouldn't accept that from your boss. Like, it's sitting around pretending like you have no agency when you're in charge of things is loser behavior.
Yeah.
Another thing that I think would help them maybe embrace this mentality: don't follow rules that don't exist. Democrats are currently mostly being hamstrung by rules that Donald Trump and the Republican Party have decided don't exist anymore.
Love to do this.
And so they'll sit around being like, oh, sadly, the process doesn't allow us to do whatever. Oh, sadly, the law says we can't do whatever. Let me let you in on a secret right now. There is no federal law.
Nobody cares.
Don't worry about anything.
Right.
When someone tells you that they can do something that's not legal, instead of being like, that's not legal, just say no.
Right.
If he says that he can do something that you know to be not a thing that a president can do legally, instead of being like, we'll fight this out in the courts, get on television where you can find one, put your telegenic person you found on television, put AOC on your TV screen or whatever, and just say no. Right. Be like, he can't do that.
Sure.
Make it hard, make him explain why he can.
Right.
This is just a messaging tactic. It has no validity, of course, but neither does him declaring he can do whatever he wants. No. Not all of this is bluster on both sides.
Right.
I don't mean to make that about him, because actually it's not. Politics is 90% bluster on both sides. Sure. So if he wants to pretend that he can do a thing that the Constitution says he can't do, listen, we can all just agree that rule doesn't exist anymore, or you can say no. Yeah. But what you can't do is sit around following the rule that he's not following. If the law doesn't exist, don't follow it.
Yeah, totally. And this, I think, is... And Democrats need to take this forward with them when they are not just in the opposition also.
Yes.
Because I think one of the reasons why people get so annoyed with Democrats is because they just seem like such do-nothing pansies.
Nothing will fundamentally change.
Nothing will fundamentally change. And I think that there's like this, we're talking about sort of like rule follow. I mean... The reason that we don't have a $15 minimum wage right now is because of the Senate parliamentarian. Right? The reason that Donald Trump just got rid of the entire Department of Education and Joe Biden was too scared to give people $10,000 in student loans. Student loan cancellation. Turns out you probably just could have
do anything.
You could have gotten rid of the entire department that, oversees those student loans.
Exactly.
So I just like this idea that like and listen, I'm not saying that like I get...
We don't want to live in a lawless society. I get that.
I get that the Democrats are the party that like to sort of like pretend to be the adult in the room, and I get that. And there is a place for that. I'm not saying there's not. But like this idea that like we can't do anything because of something stupid being in the way
outside arbitrary, rules that we made up in the first place. anytime the Senate tells you they can't do something, just know that that is a rule they made up, that they voted on and agreed to.
Yeah.
The Senate makes their own rules.
Right.
Anytime that Democrats have told us that they can't do something because the Senate has a rule that prevents them from doing it, they have been telling us that they are unwilling to do something.
That's right.
And so if the rules change with them. Adjust your tactics to reality, not to the ideal reality.
Right.
That's all that we're saying.
Yeah.
And right now, we're not in the ideal reality, sadly. No. But we live in the reality. We are in the reality.
Right.
There's only one reality, and it's not ideal.
Right.
But we're in it. So
use that to your advantage.
Use that to your advantage. Live like you know that. They can't. Here's the thing. They can't because everyone in government is a lawyer. And their entire lives are predicated on living within the sandbox of the law. And right now, the law doesn't exist, but they're like looking helplessly for whatever structure allows them to keep that worldview alive.
Yeah.
And like, that world doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
And if you're someone who lives outside of the sort of like law world, then, you're maybe able to see that.
Sure.
But if you're someone whose entire life is predicated on the sort of like supreme existence of these documents, and that has been the guiding principle of your whole life, it's very difficult to kind of comprehend the idea that whole structure could come falling down and what that means. And the problem that we have is that Washington has been a horrible place to be if you're not someone who exists in that way of thinking.
Yeah.
People who break rules have traditionally not been welcome in the Democratic Party. Activists are not welcome in the Democratic Party. People who just change norms and aren't even breaking rules are not welcome in the Democratic Party. That has to change in this moment.
Yeah.
Because in this moment, you need the kind of people who know how to exist in a lawless society, not the kind of people who only know how to exist in a lawful society.
More waitresses.
More
please.
waitresses. Yes.
Bartenders.
More bartenders, please. Exactly. Okay. Next one. When you're in the minority, and this is, I think, something that Republicans have used effectively and ineffectively in the past. But when you're in the minority, unity can't always be the main goal. Effective messaging and effective blockades are the main goal. Effective governance remains the main goal always and forever. And if, internal activists agitate people in a way that shifts narratives and shifts messaging and allows sort of weird sort of majorities to form around specific issues or whatever, you have to let that happen. You have to use every tool in your toolbox as a minority politician. You can't just be like party unity above all else. And what we're seeing right now is that a lot of the people who are most effective at communication and most effective also at existing outside of party boundaries are becoming de facto leaders of the party because they're the only people willing to say anything. And it would be so much more effective if every person in the opposition right now was freelance bootstrapping it. Because they'd all be hungry. It's like, do you want a young hungry agent or do you want a fat cat who doesn't need your money? Right. What we need right now is everyone in the Democratic Party to be fighting for airtime so that ideas start to happen. Yeah. And instead, what we have is sort of like the sort of Pelosi era unity where we don't have enough votes to stop anything. We just have enough votes to periodically lose 3 people to a bad idea and then be blamed for the worst outcome. Like, if we don't have any power, if you're telling us that the party has no power, leave it up to individuals to seek out that power. Do some politicking.
Yeah.
Your job is not to sit around and just vote how Democrats tell you to vote. The Democrats are a vehicle for effective governance, theoretically. Sure. If that vehicle isn't functioning anymore, abandon ship.
Yeah.
Just stand for whatever you stand for. Don't worry about their platform. If they don't have the power to enact any of their platform, go do whatever you want.
Right.
It's like, at that point, every man is for himself. But also, in an every man for himself scenario, maybe you pick off some Republicans around issue areas that actually do matter to your constituents. Totally. Why is Josh Hawley out here being the only person on earth who's voting to stop us from having higher bank fees? Because he has a weird thing on that issue. Right. And I'm not here to question how that fits into his worldview, because I don't fucking understand it. No. I don't care why Mike Lee didn't want to have a war in Yemen. I care that he aligned with the left wing of the Democratic Party on not wanting to have a war in Yemen. Like, I care that was an issue around which people on across the political spectrum could find common cause and therefore could try to legislate effectively on. And that's all I care about with any issue. Right. If you can't work as a party, work as something. Don't worry about unity.
Sure.
It doesn't, your unity is useless.
Right.
And that is sort of part of my next point, which is that you should be seeking common cause with people in the majority party on an issue-by-issue basis if you can.
Yeah.
There are Republicans who would probably vote for good ideas if you could present them the right way to them.
Yep.
I'm not going to say a lot of them. I don't know what's going on with them either. But no. I am saying that there's a lot of Republicans in Congress right now who have a lot to lose in this administration. And there is a way to activate some of that anger around issues.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them are also going to have to answer to their constituents as people who did not want the destruction of the federal government to actually happen.
Yeah.
Their constituents, a lot of red districts rely heavily on federal funding. So pick off people on an issue-by-issue basis and try to form coalitions around those issue areas.
Yeah. And if you can't find any, that also allows you another messaging tool.
Exactly.
Right? It's just sort of like, then you can go on the television and say, I tried to find a Republican to help reduce your bank fees, and I couldn't fucking find one.
Exactly. But, like, your obligation is to your constituents to govern as effectively as you can given the situation that you're in. It's not to wait for, like, mysterious party officials to push play on some big action.
Right.
And so you have to act like you have agency.
Don't wait on Chuck Schumer to tell you diddly squat.
He'll never push play. So don't worry about him. Yeah. This is one that I think is for both party functionaries and active Democrats, and then also the party itself, which is that you should don't prioritize fundraising over effective campaigning and actually winning. I think there is this sense inside of the Democratic Party, because it's become a very cynical place, that, and this is, I think, the sense inside of all political parties in general, the two, that fundraising equals votes. But we know that not to be true. Kamala Harris had $1 billion that were spent on nothing.
Yep.
Votes don't actually come directly from dollars. Dollars can help you find the votes. They can help you, get the messaging out to get the votes, whatever.
Yep.
But if you are prioritizing, and, this goes back to my discussion about managing media opportunities to your public as opposed to your donors.
Sure.
If your entire messaging strategy is geared to donors and not to voters, then first of all, what are you doing in politics?
Right.
Why do you even care?
Yeah.
Just go take a corporate board position somewhere and get, just make $1 zillion being evil. Like, at that point, who fucking cares? Yeah. But also, like, know that your voters are the actual goal. The money is a means to an end. Only use the money to do the thing you actually need. Getting a lot of money for a campaign that doesn't win is a waste of everyone's time and energy and money.
Truly.
So remember that ultimately what you're trying to buy with the money is votes. And you can buy some votes for free. And you can also use less money to buy more votes if you do it effectively.
Yeah.
Like, they're not a one-to-one thing.
No.
Why did AOC beat Crowley, the number 3 Democrat in the House, on a campaign that was way less funded? It was because she went after votes. It was because she found votes.
Right. She found voters. Yeah.
When you find votes, you don't need money.
Right. And she found them with ideas. If you can't afford, if you can't use money to get the votes, use ideas. Yeah. But use something to get the votes. The votes are the goal. The money is not the goal. The ideas apparently aren't even the goal. The ideas should be the goal, but they're not. The problem is, I think the money has become the goal.
But the money has become the goal. But the way, when you hear people who are active in Democratic politics talk about the money, they talk about the money like it's equivalent to votes. They talk about it like it is the goal because it's the only way to get votes. Sure. That's not true. You can get votes with ideas that you can't buy with money.
Yeah.
And so and in this moment in particular, when the entire financial world is about to, first of all, when all of the richest people who are actually financing elections are ultimately aligned on everything, which is that they want to fuck you over. Sure. And also where we're about to have a massive, depression.
Sure.
The money, you have to think about something beyond the money in order to maintain whatever little kingdom of power you want to maintain. Like, even for your own self-interest, the money's about to dry up because you've just told us that you have no power.
Right. Yes,
so you're going to have to find votes.
Yeah.
And that really goes along with our next one, which was just that all the money in the world can't replace the value of having good ideas.
Right.
Yeah. That's
well, and this is sort of like,
you can't market nothing.
You can't market nothing. And I think there's been a lot of people have sort of been like, this is my rant portion.
Good, do it.
Sort of.
Love it.
I feel like there have been a lot of people sort of like who have been wondering how it is that the Democrats have found themselves in this position where it seems like they're like completely hapless and don't know what to do. And I think there's a few reasons, but I think like this election was an interesting one because we had Kamala Harris, who was, a prosecutor who, palled around the country with Liz Cheney and multiple of her best billionaire friends, Mark Cuban amongst others, had, I think, more actual billionaires donate to her campaign, actually, I think, than Trump did. I think less money overall, but like in terms of amounts of people. And I think they really had other Republicans, both of the Cheneys endorsed her.
All of the Cheneys endorsed her.
The former governor of Michigan, who was the one who screwed over the people of Flint in the water crisis, was an early endorser of the Harris campaign, I believe.
Some of the political greats.
Or maybe that was the Biden campaign. But I mean, and I think that, Democrats have had this, at least 30 or maybe 40-year project going on where they have been attempting to fashion themselves into Republicans.
That's right.
Right? They've wanted to lower taxes. They've bailed out the banks. They're public-private partnerships. They're, Joe Biden says, I'm going to veto universal health care. Literally said that. He said nothing is going to fundamentally change. They're against free college. They didn't really work that hard to try and pass the minimum wage. They're pro-war. They're pro-business. They're pro-billionaires. They're pro-police. They're pro-deportation. I mean, prior to
and more effective at deportation than even Republicans have been.
And we're bragging about it early in this administration, confusingly.
Yeah.
And so I think that, this election, I think they went the hardest at a lot of those things that they have in a long time, and it didn't work, and it didn't work spectacularly.
Yeah.
And I think that, they are now struggling with their entire decades-long theory of the case, which has been borne out to be completely wrong on nearly every conceivable level.
Yeah.
So, when you think about it like that, you can almost see why they don't know what to do right now.
Yeah. Well, nothing that aligns with their current principles, which is moderate republicanism, is available to them in this moment because because you need to have some sort of vision that contrasts what the Republican Party is trying to do right now in order to set yourself apart from them.
Well, right. And
they don't have a vision for that.
And that's why people are confused about what their brand is. I think there's a lot of conversation about what the Democratic brand is and people don't know what it is. And I'm like, well, I know what it is, but I just know it as Republican.
Moderate Republicanism,
and I think and that's
sometimes conservative Republicanism.
And that's why people are confused about it is because they can't tell the two apart.
Yeah. No.
So it's not because they haven't. It's not because they've been unclear.
No.
You know what I mean? It's they're telling you what they think. You just can't discern it from anything else.
Well, and also, I think they have done a spectacularly bad job at messaging to their own activists because of that. Because for so much of their recent life, they have not, there's been a sort of, there's been a gap between what they claim their values to be and what policies they're advocating for.
Totally.
And so their party activists are advocating for conservative policies right now, while only able to pay lip service to vague identity politics themes as sort of their progressive values. There is no way to square that ideology right now, but also their most active members are currently scared of progressive policy and engaged in supporting incredibly conservative policy at every level on every issue, because that's the only people, first of all, that's what they've messaged to their own people.
Sure.
So, of course, they're afraid of progressive policy.
Right.
But also, the only people who would deign to be involved with them right now are inherently conservative people who needed someone to message the progressive case to them, and no one has.
No one has.
There's no one to do it.
Right. Yes, exactly. And this is a weird thing to say, but if there's anything that gives me hope that they can actually get themselves together and shoot down something like Trumpism, it's that they've been very organized in the past at collecting themselves to shoot down leftism.
Right. Left-wing populism, they have a lot of experience getting rid of.
So they have figured out how to get themselves together to fight something before.
That's right. That's true.
It's just not ever been Republicans.
No, and I think actually this bleeds seamlessly into my next point, because I don't think that there are meaningfully left-wing activists left in the party, because the people that have been active in the party of late are advocating conservative policy and are sort of just like caught in the awkwardness of pretending of claiming to be, left-wing politically, but having no political values that correspond with the left.
Sure.
But this is not a moment where traditional political strategists can serve the party well.
Yeah.
They are experts in the system as it should be, sure. Or not as it should be, but as it was.
Yeah.
The system of big money needing to find the best billionaire.
Right.
They are not experts in the system as it's functioning now, which is total fucking chaos. But you know who are experts in a system that's total fucking chaos? Activists. The very people who've been sidelined for years by the party because they remained principled in the face of this rightward shift in the party are the exact people you need right now. And I know as someone who has been told my whole life that I should go work in Washington and who has known on a deep level that that would be the worst place for me because someone like me can't actually exist inside the system. Someone like me only can exist outside the system because someone like me can observe the system. That's my skill. Yeah. My skill is not actually to observe the system from the inside. It's to observe it from the outside and explain why the inside people have opportunities they couldn't see from the inside.
Yeah.
Like, those are the people that you need to employ in Washington right now to revamp your strategy, both political and messaging strategy. Yeah. Because those are the only people who have any experience working in a lawless sort of an extra lawful capacity, not because they're breaking the rules, but because you were always willing to break the rules to sideline them.
Yeah.
So they are used to dealing with you, the very party activists who have been responsible for the rightward shift. They are used to being shut down. They are used to being shut down by conservative ideas that are being misrepresented because you've been doing it to them the whole time. They could save you right now if you weren't so distrustful of them being principled.
Yeah.
Which is essentially the problem you have with a lot of them.
Sure.
And when you think even about the left wing of the party, the problem that you have with Bernie Sanders and AOC is not even that they are principled compared to normal society members, but that they are too principled for the party as it exists now.
Yep.
And it's only because they just advocate for the ideas they actually have.
And also there's much less of them now because you allowed AIPAC to basically primary them out of their jobs in the last election.
Exactly.
Also. So, we're down Jabal Bowman, we're down Cori Bush, we're down I feel somebody else lost their primary.
Yeah.
That's the name I'm missing right now. But regardless, you get my point.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's not great.
Hire the people that you have been trying desperately to get out of your offices.
Yeah, but they don't. This is another problem with at least party leadership anyway. Is that that is an admission of their wrongness.
Yeah. Well, okay, that's then. More so than that, don't rely on them to hire those people.
Yes.
Primary them, get rid of them, and primary them because you hired those people. Run against them with a staff of those people.
Sure.
That's, I think, more... Obviously, Chuck Schumer's not going to welcome all the activists that he's been trying to kick out of his office the whole time. He's not going to be like, oh, thank God Medea Benjamin's here, finally.
Right.
I get that. But our goal should be to get some activists into Congress, and not just into Congress as candidates, but as staff, as support. It should not just be to have people who have been functioning happily and making $1 zillion in the political system as it is because they're connected to billionaires running everything. And then finally, and I think as sort of a final point for anyone who has any agency to stop literally anything that's a bad idea that's happening right now, nobody signs up to be a political martyr. It's unfair when it happens to you. I mean, some people sign up to be political martyrs, but those people are showboats. Nobody, no accident, no sort of bystander signs up to be a bystander. It happens. Unfair things happen, though. You get asked to make unfair choices all the time. And right now, federal workers are being asked to make some very unfair choices, and people who just got elected to Congress are being asked to make some unfair choices. And I'm thinking really specifically of our new Congresswoman because she just got there. She is not responsible for what has been happening right now in politics. But she is sadly in a situation that is going to take courage and some bravery that she probably doesn't possess to get us out of. Right. She has sadly put herself in the position that where she's the one who's required to make the sacrifice. And she should fucking do it and suck it up.
Yeah.
Because I am also really sick of hearing people complain about how nobody signs up to be a martyr, so nobody is obligated to make ethical choices in a situation like this. And look, I guess no one's obligated to, but you still should make ethical choices where you can and in whatever capacity you can in a situation where you have some agency to stop disaster. And
Sure.
and that kind of, that broader sort of feeling of unfairness cannot be more important to you than like the stability of the country that you live in. And like, sorry, unfair things happen, but you know what? Unfair things happen in the private sector to everyone all the time. We've all been living with unfair. This whole fucking country is unfair. And I think that a lot of the time people in government have been slightly insulated from that reality.
Yeah.
And so I don't think they realize how unfair life is out here in the streets. Right. You know? I don't think people who don't have health care from a public employer understand how unfair having health need is in this country. I don't think that people who, you know, can't be fired easily because they have union protection understand what it is to exist without union protection. I just think a lot about American life is unfair. And right now, the people who have been, I think, sitting in one of the fairest communities,
Sure.
you know, and the most stable communities in America have had their foundation shaken a little bit.
Yep.
But that doesn't release you from the obligation to act ethically
No,
in this
it
moment.
does
And I'm
not.
sorry about it. And it's not fair. You're right. You shouldn't be asked to make choices like this. As a federal employee, you shouldn't be asked to decide whether to defy your bosses or not based on whether it's ethical to round up innocent people and deport them. Like, I don't know what to say about that. It certainly is not a situation that I wish myself or anyone to be in. But in a moment like this, act courageously when you have the opportunity to, and act ethically when you can.
Yeah.
Don't pretend like because it's unfair that you don't have the obligation to.
Right.
Okay. A few quick things for regular people that are not in any way geared towards politicians. Because pretend, if you're a politician, just stop listening. Nobody needs to hear your thoughts further about this. It's, first of all, we said this before, but it is okay to be as annoying as you want with your representatives. They may talk to you like you're a wayward child who should know better. You can annoy them right back.
Yeah.
They do actually work for you. And the worst they can do is tell you you're being annoying.
Yeah.
And then you can be like, well, sorry, you're not doing your fucking job.
There were all of those reports. Remember
right.
where Democrats
Yeah.
were angry that they were hearing so much from their grassroots. It's
Yeah.
like, so keep at it. They're hearing.
Right.
They may not be listening, but they're hearing.
They're annoyed.
Right.
And that's what you want. You're
really
not
do.
you're not here to cater to their feelings.
No.
Here's something that I've been hearing a lot, just in when regular people are discussing the issues of this moment amongst themselves, that I think people should maybe at least try to check themselves on in one particular respect. I'll explain. So there are some important inside movement conversations and negotiations that don't make good public messaging. So, you know, when you're inside of a movement space, oftentimes you are rightfully asked to prioritize the voices of the people who are most impacted by whatever issue is you're trying to solve. That makes perfect sense. And also, you want to make sure that any policies that you advocate for out of that movement space address the needs of the people who need the policy the most.
Right, exactly.
That's why you're doing that. Some of that, in a crisis moment like this, doesn't make good public messaging. Democrats have been sort of doing this thing where they stand for almost nothing. But when they do stand for something, it's only the thing that affects the narrowest group of people who are also the people who have the least political agency. And they do it to virtue signal, and they don't do it because they care about those people. And they also make it impossible to message around larger, sort of broadly popular policy in doing it. So they'll be like, we're going to address the Black maternal health crisis, which someone should address. But they'll message it in a way where they're like not able to explain to women in general why this is good for them. Because they're coming up with the narrowest version of the policy that doesn't even address the needs of Black women who are pregnant, but is sort of like more broadly meant to virtue signal that, you know, they're going to have some very special means tested program that doesn't actually do anything. And they're going to be able to name a bill, something like the Black maternal health bill. And they're going to just like spend a lot of time voting on that while never passing it and, you know, having no ability to do anything.
Sure.
Instead of being like, okay, in addressing a larger maternal health crisis, what are the specific needs of Black women who we know are most impacted by this crisis?
Yep.
And how do we make sure that is addressed in this bill? And how do we make sure we message to them that it's addressed in this bill, but also message to everyone that this bill is important to everyone?
Yep.
They don't do that because they don't want to stand for the rest of it, where
Right.
they have to actually come up with a broad policy. They always pick the narrowest random group of people. And listen,
Never want a universal policy.
a universal policy is a policy that everyone benefits from, so you can see why those would be more popular as a messaging point.
Sure.
But don't do that work for the Democrats. Oftentimes you'll hear people who are like relatively well off talk amongst themselves as if progressive policies don't have any impact on them.
Sure.
So they'll kind of talk amongst themselves like, no, of course, because I come from a place of privilege, like I'm not suggesting that like I care if we have public transit, but I just care so deeply about the other people that need to take public transit.
Right.
And really, in a moment like this, where we are all going to be impacted by horrific policy, we should all be comfortable talking about how that policy impacts us, especially rich white people who are not immune to the Trump administration cuts and are not immune to having impacts by the, having these things, having, policies targeting immigrants impact them. Policies targeting public funding for public education or funding for public education impact them. No one is immune to any of these things. But oftentimes you will find Democrats talking like they don't want to admit that that these things are related to their lives in any way.
Yeah.
And I think my solution to this is not to be like, only think about yourself. But I don't think it's helpful to only be virtue signaling that you only care about other people and to pretend like broad cuts don't impact you. I feel like there is this tendency to divorce yourself in your conversations with your friends and peers as a means of virtue signaling, to divorce yourself from the impacts of any of these policies. Yeah. And in a moment like this, I don't think that makes any sense. Sure. I don't think it makes any sense to give a disclaimer before you voice an opinion about a Trump policy that will for sure impact you too.
Yep.
That it's not going to impact you as much as it impacts other people.
Yep.
Make sure that it is clear to not just each other, but also to your representatives that these policies impact you too. If you, like I was using the Laken Riley Act as an example of this, where you had a bunch of people calling their representatives to be like, I'm just so concerned, using the ACLU's example of a woman who, stole diapers to, for her baby and is now going to be deported, whatever. I'm just not comfortable, whatever. And like, sure, be concerned about the people that this, that policy of stripping due process from immigrants would entail, of course. But when you call your representative, say, I'm uncomfortable with this because I could be next.
Yes.
Your constituent, me, the person who is actually calling you, has a position that they want to advocate for their own sake and for the sake of the community that they actually do belong to, that is impacted by this policy. Connect it back to yourself. And broader than that, I want to say that maybe think about how some of these communities that you just are virtue signaling by pretending you care about actually do connect to you.
Sure.
Because I think there's also this sense that like you're just sort of like being a good person by caring about trans people. But the thing is like huge restrictions on gender affirming care might actually end up impacting you when they get too extreme. And also, you probably like hanging out with gay people because we're like super fun. And maybe you want that opportunity to continue in your life.
Yeah.
And maybe having a world in which gay people cannot be as fun as they currently are would actually impact you directly, even if for selfish reasons you just love hanging out with fun people.
Well, and that's what I think is important about this, because we were talking about this actually before we started recording, where I think that like part of what I think I want people to do in that respect is like, to your point, like interrogate to yourself what it is your support for those specific, identity politics means.
Yeah.
Like how does it actually affect you?
But think about how your personal interests are tied to other communities.
Right,
you live in society.
Yes, exactly. And that's what I feel like, to your point, it's just sort of like, these people, put their yard signs out that in this house, we believe in science and we believe in that Black Lives Matter, and that's great. Like, I'm not here to poo-poo any of that. I hope, but like, do you believe that?
Right.
And what does that mean to you?
Yeah.
Because like, I think when you can really sort of like start thinking about like, yes, how that fits into like making America better, like that's when you can sort of like start speaking about it in a way to your representatives, to your friends, to those communities themselves, like that makes them understand that like you do actually support them, and it's part of a broader, better world that you want for everyone.
Right. That that you live in society with them.
Right.
And
that,
also,
like, all of these things are intersectional. Like, you were talking about that before we started recording. At one point, all of these movements were talking about how they were intersectional with each other.
Well, and the reason that you, a sort of only slightly informed person, might be using all of these disclaimers to be like, I don't want to center myself, is because a conversation around intersectional, movement building was happening and you didn't really understand what it was about.
Yes.
But at no point were any of those movements asking you to suggest that you have nothing at stake. And that is what you hear middle class and rich white people do all over the place.
Right.
You hear them essentially say that they have nothing at stake to each other. So they all believe it because they heard it from their friends.
Yeah.
Make sure that in any conversation where you are talking about the rights of other people, that you find a way to connect that to why you, the community of people you're talking to, also have things at stake.
Yeah.
Make sure that people in your peer group understand that caring about other people actually is just like a good idea for life.
Right.
And not just something you do because you're a good person.
Because you're nice.
Yeah. Who cares about being nice?
Right.
I am not nice in my politics. I like my politics is in no way formed around being nice, and not even really formed around having an ethical responsibility to other people, if I'm being honest. My politics is formed around the idea that like my life is just better when everything is better for everyone.
Sure.
I just like living in a place where everyone's got their shit dealt with, and we don't.
Right?
I don't want to
Wouldn't it
hear
be-
about other people's stupid health problems and then
No.
problem solve their bankruptcy from it.
Wouldn't it be great if we weren't having homeless people everywhere in Los Angeles?
Yes. I love it when everyone has a home.
Right?
It makes my commute safer. It makes my grocery store less alarming to walk to. And it also, as a bonus, means that everyone has a home. It works for everyone.
It works for everyone.
It's good for everyone.
And that's not selfish.
That's not selfish, but also I don't care if it is selfish.
Well, fair.
I don't care if
No,
the
but
reason that everyone should have a home is because
Is
Lila
selfish.
Nordstrom wants to have a safer walk to, the grocery store. If that's what gets everyone a home, then that's great. You don't have to be a bigger person to want the world to be better.
No.
And you just have to understand how your life connects to other people's.
Yeah.
And that's the main political understanding that I think we should be all seeking to gain and share in this moment.
Yeah.
And part of that is because the thing that protects you from fascist politics is living in a community.
Totally.
It's your neighbors.
Yes.
And so you should know them. And you should also know what they need to have a happy life.
Yeah.
And if what they need to have a happy life is to shoot you in the head, then know that those neighbors are people all the neighbors have to watch out for, not just you. Right. Like you need to know your neighbors both proactively and reactively.
Yeah.
But like being part of a community and thinking that it is important to understand how you fit into your community is a part of resisting all of this. It's something that you can do without having to call your representatives or even think about your representatives. It's something that you can do that is that sort of ruins their plans by accident.
Sure.
And,
yes, right.
And it's something that what you want in a moment like this is to have a gossip network. And you can't do that if you don't know anyone. And you certainly can't do that if no one trusts you and no one thinks that you're an important, that you see that you're important to their community.
Yeah.
And I would say as a final thing, your short-term economic interests and long-term political interests may not be the same thing. You should try to disengage those two.
Yeah.
Especially when you're speaking about politics. If you think that you might get a tax cut because of Donald Trump giving rich people tax cuts, that might serve your short-term political interests. It may be, though, that your long-term political interests, where you want to live in a society, are not served by the rest of his platform. You should be able to engage with whichever of those things is more important to you. And I would argue that your short-term your short-term economic interests are never more important than your long-term political interests.
Sure.
It is always better to have rights than it is to have $10,000 more dollars. It is always better to have parks than it is to have $10,000 more dollars. It's always better to not have the people around you being taken off the streets or dying on the operating table or whatever it is than it is to have $10,000. Your existence in society and your life is literally just made up of like people you know and moments that you live in. It's not really made up by how many $10,000 you get a year in tax refunds.
Yeah.
So I feel like it is challenging for people often to disentangle their political and economic interests. And your political interests are always more important.
And by the way, just to be clear, we're talking about like middle and upper middle class people here.
Yeah.
Right. Like just in terms of like there are some people who like, and this is what we talked about already, but I think, or at least on our last podcast ages ago, but like, there are people whose short-term economic interests were, am I going to eat this month?
Yeah.
And those people may have to prioritize that.
Yes.
But what I'm saying is like, when people aren't taken care of, that's how we end up with fascist leaders, and that's how we end up with Donald Trump. So
I was going to say, I would argue that for most people in that situation, their economic and political interests are being served by the same party.
Sure.
I would argue that this party, this argument and this conversation belongs exclusively to people who are wealthy enough to be benefiting from conservative leadership, but want to live in society.
Right. Yes.
And that nobody who wants to just eat is not being better served by one party for both of those causes.
Sure. Yes.
Unless they want to be an asshole.
Yeah.
And some of them may want to be, but
I just wanted to make sure that we knew that some people could probably use $10,000.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm saying if your $10,000 in tax cuts.
Yes, right, of course. Yes.
Which you can't have if you don't have $10,000. Right. We're talking about a tax return. We're not talking about
on your $1 million.
Yeah. Like we're talking about getting $10,000 back in tax cuts because you had $10,000 that you spent on taxes.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I've been hearing a lot of people sort of toy with the idea that they are in part not impacted by this sort of conservative turn because they're economically insulated from it.
Yeah.
And I would say that being first of all, no one is economically insulated from bad economic policy. But also, even if that were true, your daily life is made up of living in society.
Yep.
It's not made up of just having more money that you can't spend.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So like you should be, if those things are served by separate interests, then you should be able to prioritize the one that provides value to your life.
Right.
Not the one that buys you nothing. Because if you're already very rich, you don't need $10,000.
That's right.
If you don't have $10,000, you do need $10,000.
Right.
But no one's offering it to you. So that's...
No.
Anyway, those are the kind of general thoughts that or the general conversations we've been having around like how we should think about how to move forward from this moment.
Yeah.
We don't have clear solutions and like a direct call with a script that you should make. And I think you should stop relying so much on those things because I feel like in this moment, it's not going to be enough to just call your elected officials and be like, do something, but you should do that. You also have to sort of not just rethink how you want to engage in politics, but also rethink where opportunities exist. Where does this total breakdown open an opportunity to fix something? Don't just think about it in terms of what we're losing. Sure. If you get sucked into the losing things news cycle, you'll constantly be playing defense. Yeah, if you start thinking about, okay, if we don't have a Department of Education, what's an even better way to organize public education? Let's pitch that.
Yes, and that's an important thing. I think that is actually deeply important, and we're sort of, well, we're not throwing it away at the end because now we're hitting it. But like, I do fear that, and this is why I think we need to keep pushing our electeds, and we need to keep electing better people, and we need to be electing people with better ideas, and we should not be caring what political party they're from, because I do worry that the current state of the Democratic Party is not going to be appropriately prepared to put the pieces back together if and when they ever come back into power nationally.
You can't put pieces back together if you have no vision for what it would look like to have a functioning government.
Yeah.
We don't want the pieces to go back together the way they were.
No.
It wasn't working that well, clearly, because it led us to this moment.
Right.
But I mean, like, when you see something breaking, instead of just being like, oh God, it's broken, and instead of ceding to the idea that we have no effective leadership, so there's no hope of fixing it, just think about what a fixed version could look like.
Yeah.
Free yourself of the obligation to put it back together.
Right.
Fix it by coming up with something new and better.
Yep.
So whatever ends up broken at the end of this moment, I don't think that we need to... It's sort of like going through a crisis, like like COVID or something, where I have always said the hardest thing that people have to deal with after a crisis is that you don't get normal back. And everyone is just constantly seeking normal back. And so they do risky things where, we essentially still live in a society with as much COVID as ever, but we just pretend we don't because we needed our routines back.
Right.
But, after 9/11, we rushed me back to school because we needed it to look like we were getting our routines back. Like the tendency that you have in a moment of panic is to sort of try to get back
Go
what
back
you lost.
to what you were doing. Right.
Don't approach this moment like that. That helps nobody. Approach this moment knowing that things are going to be destroyed and terrible things are going to happen and it's going to fucking suck. But approach it with the knowledge that we should seek to not just repair whatever was broken, but to alter whatever didn't work.
Yeah.
We should rebuild things instead of just fixing them.
Yeah.
And we have an opportunity right now to do that.
Yeah, there's a lot of really excited accelerationists on the internet right now.
That's right. But I mean, like, it just, to get through your own day, stop thinking about this as just a loss.
You got a really loud cat.
There's a really loud cat out there. He has something to really tell us.
Yeah. Well, we'll let him have the last word.
Yeah, there is. The cat has the last word. We'll be back now.
Yeah.
We're just,
so.
we
had to just get in there.
We had to get in there. Yeah, we had to get in front of the mics.
Yeah.
So we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.
Bye.